This is Rural Health Leadership Radio.
Episode 178, a conversation with Jack Salo, Executive Director of the Rural Health Network of South Central New York.
There's a lot that technology can do to help us become more efficient and provide a higher level of transportation service to the rural population.
Welcome to the Rural Health Leadership Radio with your host, Dr. Bill Oxier. Each week, Dr. Oxier has a conversation with a different rural health leader to discuss what's working and what's not working in rural health, along with other topics of interest to rural health leaders. Rural Health Leadership Radio's goal is to improve health in rural America by providing a simple, no-cost means to share information and connect rural health leaders from around the country. And now, here's Dr. Oxier with today's guest.
Hi, everybody. I am your host, Dr. Bill Oxier, and welcome to the Rural Health Leadership Radio podcast. Rural Health Leadership Radio is a 501c3 nonprofit, and like most nonprofits, we're always looking for ways to keep the lights on and support our mission. And so today, I'd like to recognize my company, the Dynamic Leadership Academy, for underwriting the cost of today's episode. I want to thank today's guest, Jack Salo, for taking time out of his busy schedule to have a conversation with us today. Welcome to Rural Health Leadership Radio, Jack.
Thanks, Bill. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I am too. Jack is the Executive Director of the Rural Health Network of South Central New York. So tell us about yourself. Who is Jack Salo? What's your story?
Okay. Well, ironically enough, I was born in the Bronx. We'll start at the very beginning. So I've come a long way from the Bronx to rural New York State.
I would think so.
But I've lived and worked my entire adult life in rural places and rural communities. During my early 20s, I served as a volunteer for 2 years with an organization called Minnesota Teen Corps. We were working to construct a learning center and retreat facility in northern Minnesota. So that kind of was had a real impact on my future direction in terms of service and particularly service in a rural context. And I've spent the last 30 years leading nonprofit, anti-poverty, community action, youth development, and community health organizations in rural New York State. And Bill, as you know, my family and I also operate a sheep and beef operation. So we get our exercise outdoors along with our day jobs. So that's an important part of our life and something that's particularly rewarding. So I think that, a quick overview, that pretty much summarizes kind of who I am, where I came from. One thing that we'll be talking more about is a real theme in my work over the years has been a more generalist approach to supporting rural communities and economies, whether I've worked in youth development, poverty programming, or community health. And I think as we talk, hopefully I'll be able to share some of my thoughts about how those things are connected.
Yeah, well, thank you. You've led an interesting past as well as present life, Jack, so you're one of the few people that has ever corrected me. As many of our listeners know, I do a lot of public speaking at different state conferences and all that, and I like to share my haircut story at the county fair from when I was working on a dairy farm, and so you're one of the only people that ever corrected me on my language about cattle. So I have a special place in my heart for you, Jack.
Well, thank you, Bill. Happy to help.
Yes. So why did you told us a little bit how your career path took you where you are today, but why healthcare as an occupation?
Well, yeah, I guess I would say that it's not so much healthcare as health. And it's only been in the last really 15 years in my work as a Rural Health Network director that I've worked very closely with healthcare. One of the things that is happening, and I think your listeners are I'm sure aware of this, is that healthcare and the health sector has really come around to understanding the impact of what we now call social determinants of health on health outcomes. And in fact, really social determinants environment, behavior being the greatest factors in determining health outcomes. So it's been an interesting journey for me because my career has really been working in the social service sector, the human service sector. And I think one of the things that has been particularly rewarding in particularly the last 5 years when this has taken off, is that I don't have much to offer, not having a healthcare background, to the healthcare sector, in a clinical context. But I do feel that my experience working in the nonprofit, human and social service sector is really beneficial as we start to navigate together what the future of health and healthcare looks like by wrapping in community organizations and that type of work in terms of trying to improve the health of individuals and populations.
That's very interesting. And yes, you provide a unique perspective, which can be of great value. Now, when you were telling us about yourself, you mentioned that you grew up in the Bronx, but yet you're focused on rural health. Why the focus on rural health?
Well, again, my having lived in rural places by choice, I've come to appreciate the extent to which rural communities are really at a disadvantage economically. We deal with historic stereotypes about rural places and people. We don't get our fair share of investment. So again, going back to sort of my generalist roots, I think rural health is really, it's kind of symptomatic. The health status of the rural population is really an indicator, I think, of other issues in rural places. So I guess to answer your question, my mission really is to help address some of the health disparities we're confronted with in rural places, and to really work collaboratively, across sectors to try to address those health disparities. So I think health is a real good canary in the coal mine, an indicator of the health of rural places. And so, we have sort of a dual mission. We have to address and work to improve health and well-being at the individual level, but I think we also absolutely need to do that at the community level.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, Jack, as you know, the name of this program is Rural Health Leadership Radio, and I emphasize leadership. So what's your definition of leadership?
Sure. Well, Bill, honestly, I think this was probably the question that I really had to give the most thought to.
Okay.
And so I'll share a few thoughts on leadership. I don't know that I have a specific definition, but I do have some qualities, traits, characteristics that I think are important. The first one that I would mention I was reflecting on my work over my career, and there's many good ideas that people have, that organizations have, and we see many initiatives, projects, groups that are formed, and they give it a try, and in 6 months or 2 years they fizzle out. And I think that for me, leadership is really about when you identify a way forward and you come up with a project or a strategy. It's really about follow through. And some of our most successful initiatives have taken 5, 7, 8 years to really find their legs and take off. So I think, I was keeping some notes for our talk today, and I wrote down the cliche of the 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration.
Yes,
rule.
yes.
People are familiar with that, but I really believe that to be true. I think leadership requires a lot of hard work and commitment to see something through. So that would be my first point about leadership. The second point I would make is I think that good leaders are good listeners, and I don't know how you can lead effectively without carefully listening to those that you're going to be working with within your organization, other organizations, or the community. So I know there's a term that's popped up over the years. I think it's called service leadership, and I kind of aspire to be sort of a servant leader. I want to understand before I act, and I think the only way to do that is to be a good listener. One of the things in my work is that most of the major initiatives that I've been involved with in the last probably 20, 25 years have been very collaborative types of projects. And I think that I really appreciate leadership that acknowledges the contributions of everyone who's involved in the work. Sometimes you don't notice that if somebody's doing it well, but I've seen situations where people haven't done that, and they will take credit for themselves or their own organization without acknowledging the important role that others have played. I think that's a good manners, maybe, is what that is, Bill. I'm not sure, but it's really about sharing the credit,
yes,
and acknowledging the contributions.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last point I think I'd like to make about leadership, particularly in a rural context, is that I think leaders doing work in rural communities need to be creative. Excuse me. We don't have the resource base that others have in a suburban or urban context. And one of the ways that I think we move things forward in rural health and in rural work is that we need to be open to ideas, resources. We need to be creative in breaking out of our traditional way of thinking about where to look for resources and who our partners should be. I think when we are able to cross sectors and really begin to figure out who can do what to move a project or an initiative forward, we can make some progress, and we can really overcome some of the inherent disadvantages that we're working with. So I take great pride in working with a number of organizations and people who kind of share that perspective. And I think, when you look at, the Rural Health Information Hub,
yes,
you look at that weekly e-newsletter, and it's just amazing to read about the creative work that's happening in rural health across the United States. So I think we're a group of organizations and people that really embrace innovation and creativity. And oftentimes I think it's rural organizations and collaborations and projects that lead the way in terms of showing the rest of the world what's possible. So that may be grandiose. If it is, so be it, but I really do believe it.
No, you're singing to the choir on this, because innovation, man, rural health is known for innovation, and that takes collaboration. It takes being a good listener and the mindset of a servant leader, and identifying a way forward and following through with hard work and commitment to make it happen. So that's all the stuff that you were just talking about with your definition of leadership. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now, you are the executive director of the Rural Health Network. Can you give us an overview of your organization and the community that you serve?
So the Rural Health Network of South Central New York, we're south of Syracuse and Ithaca. We're just north of the Pennsylvania border. We serve about a 10-county footprint with the highest concentration of services in 5 of those 10 counties. Binghamton, New York, is sort of at the epicenter of our service area, and it's a small city. It's really sort of the regional economic hub for this region. One of the things that may be of interest to your listeners, because I know, having lived in different parts of the country, there's different understandings of New York. And when I lived in Minnesota, people couldn't believe that there were open fields and farms where
Yes.
I came from. But we're part of Appalachia as defined by the Appalachian Regional Commission. Most of the counties that we serve are the northernmost counties in Appalachia, and we have many of the same issues that challenge other Appalachian communities. poverty. Our local economies are really not that strong. We have a serious opioid epidemic, and we have the aging demographic, all of which comes with some really challenging health situations with the population that we serve. So, just to kind of frame it, we are rural. We do have some of the challenges, that I think you would find anywhere across the United States. We were a strong agricultural economy, and that has struggled, particularly in the last 10 or 20 years. We have a few encouraging things happening in agriculture. We've had a significant influx of Amish families and farms, which has been very helpful. We also have an emerging hemp industry, which is opening up some new opportunities for local farmers and economic development. We also, just a quick note, Chobani Yogurt, one of their two major production facilities, and the first one is in our service area in Shenango County, New York, not too far from where I live. So, there's certainly some positive things happening, but we do have many of the same challenges that you would find any place in rural America. Rural Health Network specifically, we're a regional organization. We have 5 primary areas of work or service. We have a community health services sector. Most of our work in that area is about improving access to health services, and we primarily work with a community health worker model. I believe we have 6 community health workers out in the field currently, 2 of which are embedded in clinical healthcare settings, and that's been exciting work for us. We have a regional food and health network initiative. Really, the idea there is to, if you've got a local agricultural asset and you've got lifestyle and nutrition-based chronic disease, why can't we do a better job of connecting people to locally produced healthy food? And we're doing that work through 2 primary strategies, a regional farm-to-school effort, which has grown significantly over the last 10 years, and we also operate a prescription fruit and vegetable program. A big area of work for us is transportation, and we have a program called Get There, our transportation initiative. It's only been around maybe 8 years, but it's really taken off and is meeting really significant transportation to healthcare, employment, and transportation to other essential goods and services. And we can talk more about that in a few minutes. We do rural health planning and technical assistance. We help with community health planning with public health departments. And we've also been involved with a number of community needs assessments and things of that nature. And then we also are actively involved, and we've been the regional administrator for national service programming for over 10 years. We provide the AmeriCorps and VISTA program here in South Central New York and place AmeriCorps and VISTA members with a number of different health and human service organizations throughout the region. So in a nutshell, that's really our areas of work and what we're doing.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It sounds like you folks do a lot of different things. True rural health leaders wearing all those different hats in the services that you provide. Now, Jack, I know that the meaning, you're all in on the idea that words have meaning, right? And I already asked you your definition of leadership. And when we talked before, you talked about your definition of health. Can you talk about your definition of health?
Again, this was another question that I gave some thought to. I'll go back to something I said earlier. I do think that individual health is an indicator of the larger context and environment in which the person lives. So I do see health as sort of the, I don't want to say symptom because that's kind of contrary to health, but yeah. I look at it as more of an indication of what's underneath the health. And I think when you look at some of our rural health challenges, that's particularly relevant. when you look at population health and some of the statistics in our region are really not good. But I don't think clearly it's a question of the quality of the clinical health care is not good. I think our clinical health care is good. It's really about all of the underlying issues that are challenging us in terms of loss of population, aging population, lack of access to any number of different critical things that people need to live healthy, quality lives. So health, one of the things also that I would share, again, not coming from a healthcare background, one of the more shocking things that I've learned in working through Medicaid reform here in New York State is the percentage of the healthcare expense that's associated with behavioral health issues. And if I understand it correctly, the majority of our health expenses have some relationship to mental or behavioral health issues. And that to me is, again, another indication that we need to be doing more to ensure both, at all stages of life that people have what they need to live healthy. And by healthy, I'm not just singling out physical health, but also mental and behavioral health.
Absolutely.
So I look at health, I guess, Bill, really to sum it up as a much more holistic reality. It's you can't separate out the different components of health. They kind of hang together, and they also are indications of everything that's gone on in that person's life and community at any given point in time.
Thank you, Jack. Right now, we're going to take a short break. Then we'll be right back to continue our conversation with today's guest, Jack Salo, the Executive Director of the Rural Health Network of South Central New York. Defining health can be more complicated than you might think at first, especially when consider all the things that impact health. The same can be said for leadership. Have you ever considered the social determinants of leadership? One of the social determinants of leadership or issues that rural health leaders often deal with is isolation. The old expression of "it's lonely at the top" is true. It is lonely at the top, and it's often difficult, if not impossible, to have someone that you can talk to that understands the challenges you face as a rural health leader. And that is one of several reasons why participants in the Rural Health Cafe Mastermind Group get such great value from participating. The Rural Health Cafe Mastermind Group is made up of other rural health leaders from around the country facing the same challenges that you face, including isolation. Now, just having someone to talk to can make such a big difference. And not only that, having someone that you can confide in that maintains confidentiality is vitally important. So that's why one of the rules that we live by at the Rural Health Cafe is what happens at the Rural Health Cafe stays in the Rural Health Cafe. Now, we're getting ready to start 2 new Rural Health Cafe Mastermind groups, and I'd love to talk to you to see if it might be of value to you. Now, while it will help you be a more effective leader, the other good news is that it helps support the Rural Health Leadership Radio's mission. So one group that we're getting ready to start up is for CEOs only. So if you are a rural health CEO, this is exactly for you. And the other group is for a cross-section of rural health leaders. It doesn't matter what your title is. If you're a rural health leader and you would like to participate in the Rural Health Cafe Mastermind Group, this group is for you. So if you're interested, please send me an email and we can set up a quick phone call to see if it does make sense for you. All you have to do is send me an email to bill@billoxier.com. That's bill@billauxier.com. I look forward to our conversation. We're having a very interesting conversation today with our guest, Jack Salo. Jack is the Executive Director of the Rural Health Network of South Central New York, and our geographical education that Jack, that you gave us, Jack, finding out that New York is part of the state of New York is part of the Appalachia region. By definition. So, and some of the issues that we think about in Appalachia definitely apply to your area since you're part of that. So, learning a lot here today on this conversation. Right before the break, you were talking about the definition of health and the social determinants of health. And I know you do a lot of work engaging with communities, and it doesn't sound like you have a set agenda when you take on a community project like that. Instead, you look for initiatives. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I think I'd like to answer this on two different levels. First, I'd like to talk about the fact that we're a regional organization and much of our work applies across the region. So when let me step back a minute. When I first got to the Rural Health Network, I took probably 2 years really trying to understand. This goes back to the listening point we talked about earlier, but really trying to understand and figure out where a relatively small nonprofit like Rural Health Network could make a difference in terms of some of these, major challenges and issues around rural health. And one of the areas that was terribly obvious that needed additional work was the whole area of transportation. And I was fortunate enough in a prior position to be responsible for the rural public transportation system in Shenango County, New York. So I did have some background and experience in terms of rural transportation operation and what some of the issues and challenges were. But once we kind of agreed organizationally that this is something we could make a difference in, we then began to explore with a number of different partners, what the way forward would be. And I think later on in the interview we can get into some of the details. But I just wanted to make the point that a lot of the work that we're doing makes sense at the regional level, and it's not community specific. All of the communities in our region, to varying degrees, have transportation access issues, transportation barriers. So when we come up with a regional strategy, we're able to achieve some economies of scale that maybe you couldn't operate the way we do at the county level, but because we're operating regionally, we're able to have a positive impact across many local communities in our region, and we can tweak our services or our strategies to reflect any specific differences that we might find at the local level. Same thing with our food programming. We're working with over 20 different school districts with farm-to-school programming, and the economies of scale for purchasing and staffing that effort work better at the regional level. In terms of specific individual communities, we certainly work at that level also. And again, we like to pay attention to what both the opportunities are and the needs are at the local level. One example of, a couple of examples. Broome County, New York is the largest county we serve, 200,000 people, 150,000 of which are located around Binghamton, New York. This is the only large county in our service area. All the other counties have approximately 50,000 people. But rural Broome County is at a real disadvantage because, most of the resources and the influence and so on and so forth are around Binghamton. So we worked with rural Broome County stakeholders and leaders and entered into a 2-year project called Rural Broome Counts, where we looked at a number of critical issues and needs in rural Broome County and came up with a number of strategies for supporting rural Broome and addressing those needs. We've done the same thing with a project in Tioga County. So particularly when it comes to needs assessments and technical assistance, we're very very interested in helping at the county or the local level. Another example, this one also in rural Broome County, we were able to secure funding through the New York State Office for Aging to initiate something called the Naturally Occurring Retirement Community. So we're serving 2 rural townships, the northernmost townships in Broome County. And this project is really focused on supporting older residents so that they can age in place safely and with dignity. So we have a 5-year funding commitment from the New York State Office for Aging, a number of different partners, and we're very interested to see how these additional resources can help with, really help with the health status of our older residents, and also to, again, help them, those that wish to age in place safely and with dignity. This is one of, I think it's the first time this year that the New York State Office for Aging has funded rural projects, and we're one of only 2 in New York State currently. So we're excited to see how that project rolls out. But it is a little bit, we'll do both. There are some things that work best at the regional level, and then we're always looking for ways that we can support local communities and individual counties also.
Yeah, very interesting. Some very interesting things that you have ongoing as we speak. Now, one of the things that I found intriguing when we talked before, Jack, is that, you talk about the social determinants of health and all that, and some people, everybody understands the importance of that, but you not only look at the importance of that, you look at the economic impact of your initiatives. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, this is something that is I think a great opportunity for those of us who are involved in rural health. On a very tangible level, we've begun tracking our local expenditures, and I'll give you just 2 examples. We last year, I believe, we procured about $250,000 worth of locally, regionally produced healthy food for the Farm to School program and also the Prescription Fruit and Vegetable program. So we know that that is having a significant impact, particularly on some smaller to mid-sized farms and also on rural farmers markets and retailers. We have arrangements with, some independent groceries in the rural areas where the prescription fruit and vegetable recipients can utilize their vouchers, and we know that there are some very small rural farmers markets that have benefited significantly from the activity that's been generated by the prescription fruit and vegetable program. So that's an example, again, a tangible example of just tracking the actual economic investment into these local communities and economies. Another example is I was talking earlier with our transportation director, and he believes we've exceeded $100,000 in transportation procurement. Currently, we're not providing any transportation services. We purchase transportation services. So that's a growing number, and that has a very positive impact on some of the small private transportation providers and others that we purchase transportation services from. So, we believe there's a group, and again, some of your listeners may have heard of this, the Healthcare Anchor Network. I don't know, Bill, if you're familiar with that. It's a project out of an organization called the Democracy Collaborative, but these are primarily health systems, some larger hospital systems that are recognizing the fact that they are a powerful economic driver, and that along with that comes responsibility in terms of how they utilize their economic assets. And there's a number of healthcare organizations that are really being thoughtful about their use of their funds, and particularly both on the economic and community development side, recognizing that there's a relationship between what they're doing with their dollars, and also some of investment in terms of social determinant outcomes or upstream kinds of investments. So I think that, with healthcare being, almost 20% of GDP, that's a lot of money, and how that money is spent and directed can have a powerful impact, both on people's lives in terms of employment, but also in terms of investment in housing, small business, and things of that nature. The other thing I'll mention is there's a really valuable rural community and economic development model called WealthWorks. This is a model was developed, I think, in part with the Ford Foundation, the Aspen Institute, and this model really looks at working in the market economy to consider what they call value chains, and to identify as many different stakeholders along that value chain as possible who can benefit from whatever the economic initiative might be. We're actually looking at the WealthWorks model for a van pool to employment project that we're working on, and trying to be thoughtful about all the ways that van pool can have a positive impact, both on the individuals being transported, the employer, and also all of the other stakeholders that are needed to make that project go. So I would encourage, if folks are interested maybe in seeing the connection between rural health, rural community, rural economies, I think the WealthWorks model is a very, very valuable tool. The other thing in WealthWorks that is part of the framework is that they identify 8 forms of wealth or capitals that you are working to increase through your projects and your initiatives. One of those is individual capital, which is really about individual health, but they talk about individual, intellectual, social capital, cultural, natural, built, political, and financial. So it's a pretty sophisticated tool for taking a look at how your activities can impact a rural economy and a rural community. So I think rural health, whether it be hospitals, primary care, whatever it might be, there's much more opportunity to connect our work in rural health to rural community and rural economies, both through social determinants and through other avenues. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but
that's very interesting, and appreciate you sharing that.
I think there's a great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were just talking about the economic impact, you used the word assets a few times, and that reminded me when we've in prior conversations, you've talked about rural assets and building on rural assets. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I think the most obvious one is the most obvious one to me when I started working in rural health. I came in and I've gardened and farmed my whole life, and it's been a passion. And I came into this rural health position, and I said, "Whoa, we're in central New York State. We have a great agricultural history. New York State has great diversity of agricultural products." And then, our obesity and diabetes numbers are off the charts. I said, man, there must be a number of rural health networks that have initiated projects connecting better health outcomes to healthy, locally produced food. And at that time, honestly, I don't think there were any. Mm-hmm. And that shocked me, because to me, that would be probably the best example of an asset-based strategy that I could think of. If you've got an agricultural asset, it's diversified, and there's an opportunity to connect that asset to help improve health outcomes. To me, that just makes it, it's low-hanging fruit, pun intended.
Right, I hear you.
And this was really when I was thinking about your question about leadership and follow-through. We started the Food and Health Network probably 12 years ago now, and it's really it was slow and steady development, but now it's really beginning to take off in terms of, and there's a lot of, state level, national level recognition of the value of connecting people to, healthy, fresh local food sources. So that's probably, one of the best examples. I think another example is rural schools are, as your listeners know, are so important to rural life and rural communities. And we're really, we've worked with rural schools all along, but there's a community school movement now, and I think there's a recognition on the part of the rural schools that they have to, much like rural healthcare, they have to get out of their silos a bit and, work with a number of partners, both to prepare young people for life and what comes after. But they're also starting to understand that we really don't want to be ignoring the young people that are going to remain in our community. I think I've seen a great change in the perspective of some of the rural school leaders that I'm working with, recognizing that if our rural communities are going to remain viable, we need to do a really good job with the students that are in our schools, in terms of preparing them for the employment opportunities that exist here. So I think that's another example of an asset-based approach, is that, we're not just focusing on shipping everybody out to college anymore. We're recognizing that there's many young people that they're not going that way, but we have an opportunity to provide them with, a more valuable, helpful transition from their education into local employment opportunities. So I think you have to work with what you have.
Yes.
And then you have to be creative and innovative in terms of the types of partnerships. Another great example in northern Broome County, we're trying to recruit a community health worker for our naturally occurring retirement community project. And I said to the coordinator, well, let's do, we want to recruit somebody locally, get the word out through the weekly penny saver. And she said, Jack, the penny saver isn't operating anymore. I said, oh, that's not good on a number of different levels. I mean, the weekly penny saver, was about more than advertising. You had all your community news in there and so on and so forth. So I reached out to the superintendent of schools at the Whitney Point School District, and I said, Pat, I think this is a great opportunity to look at a partnership with the school and some other community partners. It would be a great learning opportunity for the kids. Can we get together and talk about what it would take to come up with a publication that we could send to the residents of northern Broome County? And she was excited about that. So she's talking with her people. But I think that's another example. We've got the school. We've got some resources with our naturally occurring retirement community project. There's other community partners who would have an interest, I think, in seeing something happen here. And we take, who's there, who wants to work together, and then we figure out a way to move forward.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. In rural healthcare, we talk a lot about rural hospital closures, right? Because unfortunately, there's been quite a few. What do we need to be doing to preserve rural hospitals and primary care in rural communities?
Yeah, that's a great question, and honestly, I don't think I'm smart enough to answer the question. We are very interested in figuring out how, as a rural health network, we can do exactly what you're saying. So one of the ways that I try to do that is to meet with our rural hospital administrators. I've met with several of them, really to understand what their issues and needs are. I was really focused on what we brought the Healthcare Association of New York State in to do a presentation a couple of years ago on the state of rural hospitals in New York State. And one of my board members who works with one of our healthcare systems said, Jack, yeah, the issue of rural hospitals is critical, but we have a whole bunch more rural primary care sites out there, some of which are vulnerable, and we should really be looking at them also. And that really got my attention. So this naturally occurring retirement community project is in a rural community that has one primary care site. And one of the things we want to understand is how we can work with that primary care site in a way that helps the primary care provider to remain viable by helping to ensure, that patients who want to go there get there. And is there some ways that, we can support them in terms of their older patient population who maybe has some needs that they're really not able to meet. So I would say, Bill, that question for me is a critical question. I don't think there's an answer specifically, and there's probably not one answer.
Right.
And I guess what I would say is we're going to be listening carefully to our rural primary care partners and our rural hospital partners so that when we have an opportunity to support them, we do. I'll give you one more quick example. I ran into a friend who's a community leader over the weekend, and he was talking about some type of health issue he had, and this is an individual who could go anywhere for their health care. And one of the things that he does is he goes to our local Shenango Memorial Hospital and to that provider network. And I think that's something that we can all do, is that, people have choice as to where they go for their healthcare services, and that's important, and you need to respect that. And then on the flip side of that coin, if we don't utilize the rural health services that we have, we put them in greater danger of not being sustainable.
Yes.
So to me, that's another really important question, is how do you balance that whole equation of needing to respect individual choice? I think part of that in a leadership context is leading by example, right? So you get your healthcare services in your rural community when you can, and really being a vocal and real supporter. Because if we don't utilize the rural health services we have, and we're going to the nearest city or whatever, when we could have that service provided locally, I think it's just another nail in the coffin. We really want to support our existing rural health infrastructure.
Yes, absolutely. So, Jack, what scares you the most about the future of rural health?
Well, for me, it's about the continued viability of rural places. Mm-hmm. Because, Bill, if the last person turns off the lights, then there's no reason to even have a rural health presence. So, for me, it's really about a larger effort of working to ensure the continuity and viability of rural communities. Because if we don't do that, our rural health services become even more marginalized, and we just don't have any scale. So that's what scares me the most, is, with an aging population. The other thing associated with that is the whole issue of workforce, which is huge here, and I know it is in other places. So with an aging population in a rural context where it's hard to recruit young people, we're really at risk of not being able to serve and meet the health-related needs of the population we have. So that scares me also.
Well, let me flip that question around. What excites you the most about the future of rural health?
I guess technology. There's great opportunity with telehealth and telemedicine. I think we're beginning to see some of that realized. I think the transportation environment, honestly, has become much more responsive through IT. you've got your ride sharing services, but even on getting away from Uber and Lyft, there's a lot that technology can do to help us become more efficient and provide a higher level of transportation service to the rural population. I think, again, and you're probably tired of me saying this, but in a more general context, I think that rural America is ripe for innovation and opportunity. I think people who are creative, who are entrepreneurial, whether it be a health system or an individual, I think there are just great opportunities to figure out how to make things work and do things better in a rural context. So I'm optimistic. I think we have a lot of challenges, but again, it gets back to like when you read the Rural Health Information Hub newsletter. There's great people out there doing great work.
Yes.
And I think we have to build on that. It's a strong community of practitioners and people who love rural health in rural places. So I'm optimistic.
Yes, a lot of things to be excited about. Jack, in the short time we've been talking here today, we've covered a lot of territory. If our listeners only take one thing away from our conversation today, what should that be?
Well, I just say, to look at the ways that our rural health services can connect to and impact on our rural communities and rural economies. I think if we can bring those things together, and it's happening with the recognition of the importance of social determinants of health, but it could happen at many different levels. So I think we're going to get much further in the direction we want to go if we bring those areas of work and those sectors together in some strategic and creative ways.
Jack Salo, Executive Director of the Rural Health Network of South Central New York, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Bill, for the opportunity.
And I want to thank all of you out there for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever your favorite podcast app might be, and subscribe to Rural Health Leadership Radio. And if you'd like to continue the conversation of leadership in rural health, you can also join our LinkedIn group called Rural Health Leadership Radio. And while you're on Facebook today, we would also appreciate a like on Rural Health Leadership Radio's Facebook page. Until next week, let's keep working to improve rural health, one conversation at a time.
If you would like to connect with today's guest, please send an email with your contact information to bill@billoxier.com. If you would like to be a guest or suggest someone else as a guest, have a question you would like to ask, or simply want to contact Rural Health Leadership Radio, please use that same email address, bill@billoxier.com. That's BILL@BILLAUXIER.com. You can also visit our website at www.rhlradio.com.
And we'd ask that you please support our sponsor, the Dynamic Leadership Academy for Rural Health. The Dynamic Leadership Academy for Rural Health's mission is to improve